phone, the local ASQ chapter. It was done on person. This particular paper would be much more fun if we were in person. I'll try to make it as entertaining as I can, even though we're not going to be able to see each other. Again, my name is David Butler. I'm currently Quality Systems Director, Global Quality Systems Director of T Automotive, but more importantly for this paper, I'm Chair-elect for the Automotive Division. Been a member of the Automotive Division for about 40 years and the ASQ for 40 years. They had asked me, been after me for quite some time to present another paper. I used to present papers all the time, but I got tired of presenting about SPC and DOE and all that. You know, after a while, you just get kind of burnt out on it. When Jay had approached me to present at the Ann Arbor section last year, I told him I would present if I could present on something non-technical. So the paper I'm going to present today is not a highly technical paper, but hopefully it'll get you thinking about some things about our industry, our profession, and some of the challenges that we're going to have going forward. So I'm going to start off by giving you a little bit of the history of myself and about where this paper is coming from. Again, I started in quality in 1976. My assumption there's quite a few people on this call that probably weren't even around in 1976. Been doing this for about 40 years, mostly for large Tier 1 companies, 5 of them in total. The smallest one was about $4 billion, which is the company I work for now. I started off on the shop floor, then became a quality inspector, supervisor, so I've kind of worked my way up to where I'm at now. And as I said before, I've been in the automotive division for the ASQ since the beginning. I've been to 30 world conferences, and I've met thousands of quality people during my career. I let everybody know that quality has an effect on people. Before quality, I tell everybody that, you know, I used to be tall and thin, had long hair. Now, not so much. You know, now I'm shorter. I'm a little, not a little, I'm quite a bit overweight, and I have no hair. I'm assuming if I could see the people on the call, there's probably a few of you that have progressed through your quality career similar to the way I have. But the point is that quality is both a rewarding profession, but it can also take a toll on you over time. The pictures I put on the screen right now, many of them you will recognize. There's Dr. Duran, Dr. Deming, Dr. Fogelbaum. These are the gurus of quality. Many of them are honorary members, or they're all honorary members. I put this up because I have personally trained or had discussions with each and every one of these. I'm very honored to have been around long enough to have known or at least participated in training from these gentlemen. And I wanted to highlight a couple of them in particular. The person in the upper left is Dr. John Romey, and then Dr. Dorian Shannon on the lower right. Those two people I considered personal friends. I took quite a few different training sessions from them over the years, and they've taught me quite a bit about quality and about being a quality professional. There's a ton of courses out there for quality. Many of you are here on this particular webinar to get some RU credits to help you with your recertifications. Some of you are just trying to wanted to hear what I had to say, and hopefully it'll be interesting to you. But there are a ton of quality courses available through the AIG, and then most importantly through the ASQ. There's a lot of books, thousands of books out there relating to ASQ and related to quality, everything from problem solving to statistics to human resources. Literally anything you wanted to learn about being a quality professional or how to manage a quality situation. Point is for our profession, for quality professionals, there's really no reason why we should not know about our job or how to do our job. The ASQ body of knowledge is very robust. Who are the quality folks? Well, one of the questions I've been asking now for 35 years is everywhere I've been and every time I've spoken and at all the world conferences I've been to, I ask everybody in the audience, how many of you actually planned your career in quality? In other words, when you were a little boy or a little girl, how many of you have planned your career? Raise your hand if you, when you're a little boy or girl, said, when I grow up, I want to be in quality. To this date, and I'll give you a conservative estimate. I'm going to guess I've asked that question to 25,000 people. I have never met a single person anywhere in the world yet that raised their hand and says, yep, when I was a little boy or a little girl, I wanted to be in quality. And I can't see the folks on this call, but I'm going to guess that if there's anybody out on this particular call that did want to be in quality, it's a very small amount. And one of the things we're going to talk about in this paper is why. Why is it that case? In addition, for those of you who have been to college and schools or have children in college and schools, you know, less than 5% of the current colleges and universities worldwide, not just in the United States, have programs relating to quality. There used to be a few more, but over the last 7 to 8 years, they started canceling because they couldn't get enough people to sign up to take the courses so that they could make them justifiable and actually make any kind of profit or even break even off of them. Baby boomers, which is my generation, make up about 60 to 65% of today's quality managers and engineers. This is based off of a paper that, or a project that the ASQ did about 3 years ago, where they went out and did a survey. It's also based off of 3 or 4 other large organizations that I'm affiliated with, where they were explaining that in today's world, and this is not just a U.S. phenomenon, but it's pretty much global, at least in the industrialized countries, that right now the baby boomers, in other words, my generation, currently makes up the majority of the quality managers and engineers that are out there practicing. Every day, and this is a statistic that I'm not excited about, but every day 17,500 of us turn 65 years old or other. So baby boomers, which are from 1946 to 1964, and as you can see right now we're in 2015. The part of the slide I'll put up, even though it's not my favorite part, is that you can see we're getting to the time of the cycle where most of the baby boomers are either retiring or they're moving on somewhere else to practice their profession. So as you can see right now, the baby boomer effect is going to have a dramatic, it's going to play a big role in what happens in the career of quality going forward. So if you stop and think about, you know, who's next in line, that's one of the other things that I wanted to have some discussion on today in the papers. During my career, when I first got started, I had mentors. I had a gentleman, my very first mentor in quality was a gentleman named Sam Sabatis. I worked with him and under him for a year by his side, where he took me under his wing and taught me the ropes about quality. Literally had a mentor, and for the first probably 10 years of my career, there was always somebody above me that was helping me learn how to do the job and teaching me how to be effective quality professional. Today, there's none of that, or very few companies, if any, still have any of that, because the cost structures change. Everybody's getting lean. Their budgets are such to where there's not as much money being allocated for training and develop. I work for a very large company, very profitable company, and even in our company, we do not have anywhere near the kind of training and budget that we had back in the 70s and 80s. And then stop and think about it. They talk funny. When I'm presenting this in person, this is a lot of fun to talk about this, because usually there's some of they in the audience. What I mean by they is, this is we, baby boomers. This is what we look like. We're typically the type of manager that likes to sit around a table and talk and benchmark and share ideas, and the way we conduct ourselves in business is, you know, is face-to-face and in person. They are the new generations. They're the ones who use cell phones and text messages and using the media as a way of communicating. Now, I'm not criticizing or saying it's bad or good. I'm just saying that there's a significant difference in the way that us communicates and the way that them communicates, and the passing of knowledge and experience from us to them is going to be probably a bigger challenge than it's ever been before in previous generations. So I just wanted to set a little bit of a groundwork as to where we are today from a standpoint of being a quality professional. Now I thought I'd talk about why is it, or give some ideas of why people may not want to be in quality, or what is wrong with quality. And I'm going to go all the way back into the 70s, because, again, as I said, I started back then, and so I lived through this stuff. And see if there's anybody else on this webinar, participant webinar from my generation, and you'll probably be very familiar with it. If there's the mostly younger people on this webinar, I'm quite certain you've probably heard about this. But back in the 70s and 80s, early 80s, the culture was pretty hostile. You know, being a quality professional was not the most pleasant experience back then. There was a lot of in your face and not necessarily face to face. The The experts, we all became experts on containment and problem solving, and in particular in turning the other cheek because you had to, because the cooperation levels were quite a bit significantly different back then than they are now. There was a period where the quality manager was fired every time there was a quality problem, and I know a lot of you, especially if you're younger folks on this call, may not have gone through that, but I have personally lived through that, where friends of mine and people that I knew and worked with for many years, a problem occurred at a plant or out in the field, and because it was a quality problem, they fired the person that was responsible for quality. Whether they shipped the part, they approved the part, they made the part, it didn't matter. But back in the earlier days, at least of my profession, there was a lot of this that went on. They fired the quality manager whenever there was quality issues. There was also a problem where at that time there was way too many customer requirements, and that drove a problem where there was no trust. Nobody trusted anybody. The theme of this paper is about trust, the lack of trust in our industry, the lack of trust in our profession. It's back then when I first got started in this thing that was very prevalent. OEMs did not trust the suppliers, and I'm not just talking about automotive OEMs, even though that's where majority of my experience is, but OEMs, whether they were in aerospace and defense or whether they were in electronics in the extent, back in the earlier days of the quality profession, they didn't trust suppliers. The suppliers did not trust the OEMs. The OEMs didn't trust each other. There was no collaboration or cooperation. They didn't even hardly talk to each other all the time. And suppliers didn't trust each other. There was just no way that we were going to have anything to do with our competitors at all. And especially in the late 70s and early 80s when the Asian market started making headway into the North American market and into the global market. Nobody trusted the government, but you can judge that one for yourself, whether they should or shouldn't. But this is the way it was back in the 70s. Again, it was a very difficult situation being in quality profession because the relationships were much more complicated and much complex. Quality in itself should be a fairly easy profession because everything is black and white. We have procedures, we have processes, everything's written down. If something's not to print, you know what you're supposed to do about it. If you want to use it, you know what you're supposed to do about it. If you want to sort it. Literally, our profession should be a fairly simple profession to participate in. But because of this lack of trust and the emotions that come out of it, it can be one of the most difficult professions to be a part of. And part of that was due to what customers wanted. Now back then, General Motors had gone from Spear to Targets for Excellence. During my first 10 years with General Motors, they had changed this 3 times. There was TQM, Chrysler, Ford started the Q1 up, there was the TPS system, Nissan had ANPQ. They all wanted blood is basically what they wanted. And at one time in the late 70s and 30s, I counted over 30 different manuals. A friend of mine, when I presented this paper in Ann Arbor last year, came up to me and he said that there was actually 40. And since this paper, I probably should have corrected it because he showed me the ones that I had missed. So back in the 70s and 80s, there were at least 40 different sets of guidelines that customers were giving us that we were supposed to try to follow and try to align with in one plant or in one business. Then back in the mid-80s, the suppliers, with support from some industry groups such as AIG and ASQ, were able to convince the automotive OEMs in particular that they needed to start aligning themselves a little better. It was becoming too expensive, and it was literally becoming almost impossible to try to keep up with all those requirements. So they came up with the very first of the global or the standards for the industry, which was called QS 9000. For those of you that are very young, this is the predecessor for what you know of today as TS 16949. This was basically the first main attempt that the OEMs, in particular Ford, GM, Chrysler, and so forth, took at actually trying to come up with common rules and practices and guidelines for the automotive suppliers. That's where these AIG toolbooks came from, the FEMA book, the Measurement System Analysis, PPAP, SPC. the APQP guidelines. These books were all developed as a part of that cycle in time back many, many years ago. I helped write the FEMA book, and that was 30 years ago. These books, if you're practicing today, whether you're in the automotive industry or another industry, you're probably very familiar with these because these books are still global and very much common today. Almost all automotive companies are utilizing at least some portion or another of these books. So this is an example of where, over time, the collaboration and the cooperation has been successful. However, what this was all intended to be about, or what this was all focused on, then was money. As suppliers, can you give me more money? Let's talk about annual givebacks. So it was better, but it still wasn't perfect because the commercial side of the business was still getting in the way of having a better level of trust and about having a better level of cooperation between the customer and all the suppliers that they dealt with. But we began to actually work together. I currently sit on 3 different councils, but these are as example of one of them that's, as far as I know, it's still sitting. They just haven't had a meeting in a long time. This one was a Chrysler council called the Supplier Advisory Council. The names on the right-hand side, my company is TI Automotive, which is in the middle toward the bottom. All the names on that particular attendee list are competitors to TI Automotive. They either competed with us in the manufacture of fuel tanks or pumps and modules or some type of rate lines, but every name on that list are competitors, and we were actually sitting in meeting rooms at Chrysler's and having discussions about how to solve common problems and how to help make Chrysler better, and it actually worked very well. And if you look at some of these names on here, you'll see that these are some very large companies that are very particular about who they share their technology with. Some of these companies have a culture of not necessarily wanting to be too forthright in discussing their issues open and honest, but I can tell you that I participated on this team for several years, and the meetings were very open and forthright. So there was a time back not that many years ago, where there was a little bit more trust between the suppliers. There was a little bit more trust between the OEMs, and we were actually starting to make progress solving some common problems we had. One example was, as I mentioned, the company I work for, we make fuel tanks, the plastic fuel tanks, and several of the processes for making that fuel tank are you have to weld other plastic components to the tank, things like valves and connectors and things like that. And back in before these meetings started taking place, the standards or the plastic requirements for those parts were not always the best for joining them together welding. The type of plastics were not very conducive to welding together on a fuel tank, and so all of these companies on this list that had that type of process were having problems off and on trying to maintain a process that could weld 2 different types of plastics that weren't really meant to be welded together and putting them into a fuel tank that had some very tight leak standards. Well, one of the first things that this team did was we brought that up to Chrysler. We met with their materials people, and with input from all of the people on this list that had that process, we actually were able to convince Chrysler to change that standard, and it made a major impact in the problems that we're all experiencing, and it made a major impact on Chrysler. So that was an example of how having trust and being able to work together was actually very good for the industry, and it was very good for each one of these companies. But then it happened, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, but the very first one that had a major effect was back when the Toyota issues popped up. And you ever notice when there's a campaign how competitors immediately announce, their campaigns? When the Toyota campaign came out, next thing you know, several other OEMs were announcing some of theirs. They figured that Toyota was going to get all the bad press, so it was a good time to announce theirs. And the other thing I notice about when these kinds of campaigns come out is that the competitors also start beefing up their marketing so they can kind of help the other guy out with their sudden lack of available vehicles. It's amazing how the industry, joins together to help out when you have a situation like this. But when this Toyota campaign hit a few years back, and I think everybody here remembers it because it was a shock to most people, it was massive. It was global, and it turned out to have some ramifications that none of us had ever seen or expected. Then, of course, followed right up behind that, we had another one, in the top two largest automotive companies in the world, back to back. General Motors had an issue that popped up, blame for people that died, and this thing has gone a lot much farther than it has when I prepared this paper. And I don't think there's anybody on this call that probably doesn't know about this particular problem, the GM ignition switch problem. It brought about some new things that I had never seen before in my career, and like I said, I've been doing this a really long time. I've made safety items pretty much my entire career, everything from brakes to seat belts to airbags to fuel tanks and fuel handling equipment. I've never seen some of the things that have started popping up now in the last few years. For example, now you see NBC, ABC, CBS, Facebook, LinkedIn, Pinterest. I mean, now the media is jumped on this. This is a major issue. And in the old days, you used to read about it on the third page of the paper. If it was a really big one like the old Ford Pinto thing or the tire problem that Ford had, you might see it on news for a couple days. But nowadays, anytime you have these issues, it's front line, it's headlines, it's the thing to talk about. Lawyers are getting rich. They always have gotten rich off of these type of things, but they're really getting rich nowadays because of the fact that governments are getting involved. Not only is the U.S. has always been a kind of a litigious country, but other countries are starting to allow lawsuits to be filed against manufacturers, and so the lawyers are literally just reaping in the benefits of all these kind of problems that are coming out of the automotive industry. And now politicians are on the bandwagon. I still don't understand it. Maybe someday somebody on this call could sit down and explain it to me, but I don't understand why an issue like the GM ignition switch is required fodder for somebody to get reelected to Congress. But it is, nonetheless. Nowadays, the OEMs and the leaders of these companies have to go to Washington and explain all these issues. And it's not just the safety items. I can understand safety items where people's livelihoods and lives and things like that could be staked. But it's issues that are not related to safety. It's issues that really aren't a threat, just that they're a major financial problem or makes the customer unhappy. And of course, fingers are starting to point. I would, again, one of the questions I would ask if we were doing this in person is I had a list of old issues that were very famous, and I'd ask anybody if they could remember who was involved or even what the supplier was that was involved in. Very rarely does anybody, unless they're my age or been around as long as I have, could anybody even answer those questions. But nowadays, if I asked you about the person that was at least the finger pointed at for the GM ignition switch, his picture's on the paper. You can Google his name. You can find out where he lives. This engineer, and I'm not judging whether he did it or didn't do it or any of that, but the fact of the matter is everywhere in the world now, they know who he is. They know that this is the name that's been associated with that problem, and this is all new to the automotive industry. And the reason I'm putting it in this paper is because it has a major effect on trust and on how we deal with each other. Also, as a result of that, there's more rules, there's more paperwork, more audits. The customers have reacted, trying to protect themselves from being in those positions. So all of a sudden, the cooperation levels that we had and the commonization and standardization that we had is starting to slip away. People are suspicious again, they're angry, and we've basically lost the trust again. As I mentioned, the company I work for, we make fuel systems. What would you think is going to happen the next time or any time that my company goes in and asks for an engineering change at General Motors? And it may very well be a really good idea. It may very well be something that would be a benefit to everybody. But the process, and maybe it should, but the capability of getting engineering changes and improvements in that made going forward now is going to be drastically different. And maybe some of that might be a good thing because of safety problems, but in addition, it's already, I think most of you on this call that deal with this know that it's way overkill. It's just become a nightmare to even submit the simplest change, especially if you make safety items. And the other OEMs are also start following. Now, when I wrote this paper back a year ago, Again, and I admit it was not intended to be a technical paper. Since the time I wrote this paper, we've had a couple other issues. The biggest one, of course, is the Takata issue everybody's familiar with, and then major problems with Volkswagen and the credibility of that. So if you added those two to this discussion, obviously you can see that the automotive industry and other industries, because we got car seat problems where look at that, we have dog food recalls. Just in general, globally around the world right now, the perception of quality and the trust levels for quality professionals has been damaged severely. That's my opinion, and I think there's a lot of evidence out there that would support it. Add to that we are now global, and there are places around the world where the concept of intellectual property means if you're smart enough to use it, then it's yours. And so what has happened, and I can give you one example now. I have one very, very large customer, who's one of the largest automotive suppliers in the world. They are both a competitor and a supplier to us, and we actually supply them products. So our relationship is all three parts of the cycle. The competitor side, obviously when we compete with them on things, they're very touchy about wanting to share things, and so are we because of the type of products we produce. The part of their company that supplies us products sent me a letter, and again, I'm responsible for global quality for my company, so I got a formal letter from the vice president of this company telling me that from this point forward, they will no longer share their design FEMAs, their PPAPs, even PPAPs, or any kind of document like that with us going forward, because they've got a problem with intellectual property and protecting it, in particular in parts of the world where protecting it's a little more challenging. I got another letter from a vice president of another division, the one we supply, telling us that they want to see copies of our design FEMAs. They want us to give them to them. They want to be able to review them on site. They want us to sign over some very intricate documents with them that we've never been asked to sign before. And again, this is intended for them to be able to protect the intellectual property from the other side. Obviously, I responded back to both of these letters reminding of what the current arrangements in the industry are. But the point being is that intellectual property itself is being challenged around the world, and that is also causing a large amount of mistrust among quality professionals and among the industries. So what is happening is, again, it's harder to get FEMAs. FEMAs are intended to protect everybody. They should not be considered, something that you would want to hide. We've long had a practice to where FEMAs were never given out, but they were at least shared and reviewed, and you talk to them with the customer, with the supplier, so that they understood what the risks were, and they could therefore go out and put in proper controls. But now we're seeing more and more often that some of the companies, in particular larger companies, aren't even willing to share them with us anymore, so we can't even see what the risk is that we're supposed to protect against, or we can't see the way that they're protecting the risk that they cause for us. It's gotten to where even PPAPs. PPAP is a pretty standard process, and I've actually had some suppliers tell us that they won't be providing us PPAPs. Obviously, in our case, and in most cases in the automotive industry, if they're not going to provide PPAP, then they're not going to provide product, because we will never be able to ship it without it. So you have to get lawyers involved. Sometimes you have to get customers involved. But the bottom line is because of some of the problems that we created for ourselves in the industry with some major issues, and with the way that some of our companies have managed those major issues, and with the problems we got with trying to take our businesses global, the trust in our industry and in our profession is way down low. So once again, customers are creating a lot more paperwork and a lot more rules, just like they did, and even worse in some cases than they had back in the 70s when I first got into the business. You're seeing engineers put tighter standards and tolerances and more critical characteristics on drawings, in particular customers' drawings, with the intent, or at least the alleged intent, being to try to make the part more robust, when in many cases what it's actually doing, it's making the part more difficult to manufacture. If they haven't taken into account design for manufacturability, putting tighter standards and tolerances on it just creates more potential for quality problems in any way. It also creates more room for, if there ever is a problem, for lawyers and people familiar with how risk is managed to pick apart your processes and use those against you if they ever want to in a court of law. Definitely doesn't. The customers no longer trust us with how we manage our suppliers. Again, this is back to, and in my case, I believe that there's at least 2 or 3 of the customers that I've been dealing with for 40 years where it's actually worse than it was in the 70s. But they are now getting much more involved at managing suppliers and down to the tier and then. And again, if you look at some of the documents that are being released and some of the addendums to the standards that are being released, you can see that the OEMs just flat don't trust us. And quite honestly, it's hard for me to argue that point because having dealt with a lot of suppliers over the years, we haven't really been as effective managing suppliers as we should have been. Decisions are now being based off of time and not data. Again, in the old days, before you announce a campaign or shut down a plant or stop a yard from shipping product or anything like that, you would typically wait till you had some data to explain how serious the problem was. What is the scope? What is the nature of the problem? Is it all of them? Is it something we can, find? But because, again, of the publicity, the media, the government's involvement, and the legal ramifications that face companies nowadays, decisions are made very quickly. So if you don't have data very quickly that can give the OEM or your customer, or even yourself, some cause for saying, okay, we don't need to take this action. If you don't have the data readily available, typically the actions take place much, much quicker. An example I can give of that is a few years back, we had a situation where we had a couple of our products that we found the problem ourselves. We found a module that wasn't working correctly. We notified our customer, and we began to look and to see what the problem was. Before we could get back to the customer, they made the decision to stop building their vehicles in this particular assembly plant. And for those of you who have ever done that, it's not a very pleasant experience, and it's also an extremely expensive problem to have. To make a really long story short, there was a total of 3 parts involved. They were all 3 prototype parts that somehow got off of an engineer's desk and got down to our test lab. They never did get put in the vehicles, but one of our quality people thought that they may have been put in the vehicles. It did not pass our tests. They did the proper thing by raising the red flag, but before we could search the serial numbers and the barcodes and track it down to prove what it was, the customer had already stopped at the assembly line, and it cost my company 6 hours worth of assembly line downtime because of the timing. So again, in the old days, that probably would not have happened, but nowadays everybody is going to react a lot quicker. There's more audits, more visits from customers, more meetings. It's becoming more bureaucratic again. It's literally becoming more and more difficult to be a quality professional, and particularly in the automotive industry, because of all these problems. And so trust, again, is basically gone, or is at the brink of going away. If you take a look at the 2014 customer requirements, and I can talk to you a little bit about the newer ones if you want. I wrote a paper that was in this month's Quality Progress along with Ron Monroe and Mike Willison about the new anticipation about how the new ISO standard is going to affect TS 16949. But if you look at the current requirements, there is still TS 16949, and it's intended to be, the global standard based on ISO. But if you also look at it, you have VDA, which is a German equivalent of it, which is also an ISO-based standard that requires second-party audits. You have some interpretation documents out there from the IATF. Then, of course, now you're starting to see more and more and more customer-specific addendums to the standard. In some cases, these addendums are actually thicker than the ISO standard is itself. So it's beginning to look more and more like the 1970s all over again. So basically what it is, to be a supplier in the automotive industry today, we have a variety of very complicated standards and requirements that do not align very well, that are in some cases, I won't say conflicting, but in different directions. And if you have a plant or a product line where you supply to multiple different customers, it is very difficult to be able to effectively, and in particular cost effectively, be able to qualify that part or manage that part, and at the same time meet all these standards from all these different customer requirements. And they change fairly regular. Some of these standards have been changing at a period of every 6 months. So basically what that means is we have a challenge that we have to figure out how to work around. In addition, suppliers don't trust customers anymore either. We believe that all they're looking for is money, and there's a few of them that have fortified that, but you know, the suppliers are very reluctant to share a whole lot of information with customers and to sign up for things because customers have been passing warranty costs back, design costs back. They want suppliers to help with tooling. And so the cost of business is gone up, in particular with some customers. So suppliers are very careful what they will say and give the customers because of the fact that they don't want to sign up for something that is going to cost them money. As I pointed out a minute ago, customers are continuing to change the rules. Standards, even commercial rules tend to get changed more often than they have been for quite some time. Like I had mentioned in the earlier last slide, was customers' requirements and specific documents are actually bigger than the standards themselves are, which has not happened in 40 years. And customers think that the suppliers, they own the supplier's intellectual property. In fact, there are several large companies out there where if you want to do business with them, you have to be willing to sign off a document that basically states that, because they feel they're more able to protect it than some of their suppliers are. And they don't want their competitors getting intellectual property even if you developed it for them. So suppliers don't trust the customers when it comes to intellectual property either. And they don't trust the people that lead. And this is just an example. It wasn't intended to be, but it's just a basic, simple thing that Mr. Marchioni said that customers or suppliers reacted to very hostily. He made the statement that he was envious of some of the margins he sees coming from suppliers. Now, if you read that and you didn't know anything about him or the industry, and that might not be that terrible of a statement. But if you remember when this first came out, there was a huge uproar, and several large suppliers actually decided they weren't not going to do business with the company anymore. But people that lead the customers are also creating some of the problems for the customers, even if it's innocent or even if it was intended that way. The suppliers are looking at the OEM leaders the same way that the government and the media is looking at the customers. And again, as a competitor, we're just back to being competitors again, and I mean that from the truest sense. Those meetings that I had mentioned that I had attended before that I really enjoyed attending, they don't take place, or at least I haven't heard of any of them taking place. The folks that I deal with that are both suppliers and competitors or customer competitors, the relationship has gone back to being much more difficult, takes much longer to work things out than it did back when we could sit and talk. And in particular, we don't, even when we have the same type of problems, we're not sharing that information, so the problems aren't getting fixed the way they were as short as 3, 4, 5 years ago. So what is wrong with us now? If you pay attention to the presentation I gave starting back in the 70s and 80s, what do you think is the biggest problem we have today? You think it's that there's too many custom requirements or that there's no trust? Which of these two things would you think is the biggest problem? And again, if this was face-to-face, I would actually be talking to you about that, but because it's a webinar, we aren't going to be able to do that. But I can assure you that the one that's creating all the problems is the lack of trust, because that is what is driving the new customer requirements. Customers do not trust suppliers, and so they are putting more things down in writing, putting more rules in place that we are expected to follow to try to help us manage our suppliers, try to help us manage our advanced quality planning processes, try to help us manage our businesses. And so their way of trying to do that is by putting it in writing and putting it in their contract, and that's what they're trying to do to help us manage the problem that we have with trust. Now, trust is a two-way thing. You can't have a one-way trust. So, I mean, again, I can't see the folk on this call face, but I'm pretty sure I know what you would be saying. I'm going to give you an example of trust, in particular how it's two-way. The folks that are on this call that are golfers will be able to relate to this very well. If you're not a golfer, then I think if you're familiar with the sport enough, it should help you. But the example I'm going to give you is that let's look at it this way. You are playing. You belong to a golf league or a golf club, and you're the final day of the final round of the season, and you're playing for the championship for your club. It's you and the opponent that you're playing with, and you two lead the entire tournament. In fact, it's come down to where either you or your opponent are going to be the club champion. And you've been playing all day long, and you're on the 18th green, or excuse me, the 18th tee, and you're about to tee off. Since you won the last hole, you're about to tee off first. Now you're dead tied, and whoever wins this hole will be the club champion. So you get up to the tee box, and you put your ball down, and you take your swing, and you hit a beautiful shot. It's right down the middle of the fairway, 260, 270 yards. It's right down there, and you just big sigh of relief. You feel really good about it, and you're very happy. Your opponent gets up there, and he puts his ball down, and he takes his swing, and whack! He slices the heck out of it, and it goes way off to the right and way off into the trees and in the bushes. Now, because your golf is a game of etiquette, you're not going to laugh at him, even though deep down inside you might be feeling pretty good about it. But because of the rules of golf and etiquette, you go with your opponent over, and you start trying to help him locate his ball, which is over in the woods somewhere. And you're looking with him, and he's looking, and he's not able to find his ball. And he keeps looking, and again, there's certain rules about this, that after a certain period of time, you have to stop looking. And if you lose your ball in golf off the tee box, you're supposed to go back to the tee box and hit a ball again, and you have to take a penalty stroke. So you have to add one more stroke to your shot. Well, your opponent finally says, well, we've looked a lot. Why don't you go out in the fairway, go ahead and hit your ball. I'll look for another minute or two, and if I don't find my ball, I'll jump on the cart, and I'll go back and hit another one, and we'll just proceed. So you walk out to the middle of the fairway with your club, and you dress your ball, and you hit another beautiful shot. You hit it right up on the green. It rolls within 5 or 6 feet of the cup, and you're sitting there looking at least a par, but probably a good shot at birdie, which you're feeling pretty confident is going to help you win this club championship. All of a sudden you hear from the woods, I found it! And you hear a whack, and this ball comes flying out of the woods, bouncing off of things and rolling up the fairway, and just keep bouncing, and miraculously this thing rolls up and lands on the green about 6 or 7 inches away from the hole. So here's the trust dilemma that you have. Do you reach in your pocket and pull out his ball and tell him he didn't hit your ball, or do you trust that you're going to make that 6 or 7 foot putt to tie the game? So an example of trust is that trust is two-way. So in businesses, between the OEMs, between suppliers, between co-workers, between manufacturing and engineering, if you don't have trust, it's very hard to build quality product. It's very hard to run a successful business. Trust is the key to a lot of different things. In fact, trust is the key to everything, in my opinion. It's the key to strong partnership, and in most cases, you have to earn the trust. It's not given to you. You have to earn it, and you earn it by the way you conduct yourself and the way you conduct your business. Once you have it, you better do whatever it takes to keep it, because if you don't, you may never get it back. If you look around what's been going on in our industry and some of the other industries that you see in the headlines, you can see that there are some very famous, very profitable, very well-respected companies and leaders that right now have a very serious problem because they've lost trust, and they may never be able to get it back, and it's affecting them professionally, and it's affecting their business, and it's affecting their company. I personally believe the secret for maintaining trust in any relationship, and that includes my own personal relationship, is that you have to keep track of 3 simple principles. And this is not nuclear science. This is stuff that Dr. Romy and Dorian Shanin and the people that I learned from, Sam Sabatis back 40 years ago, the people told me. Basically, the first thing is you have to be honest. If you're not honest with yourself, if you're not honest with the people that you're working with and the people that are working with you, then you can't have trust. If you're deceitful, you don't give the whole story, you lie, you hide things, then you're not going to be able to have trust. You cannot have trust in any kind of relationship if you're not honest. So that's one of the key things. I also believe you have to be open. again, in the case of the FEMAs and the risk in that, you're going to see when the new ISO standard's been released. Believe that when the new TS standards comes out, it's going to have much more emphasis, as the ISO standard did, on managing risk. If we are not open with each other about what is a risk, it's going to be a really difficult and basically impossible for us to be able to manage it. So being open with each other and being open about things is also critical to being able to have trust, because if you have secrets or if there's things that you're not sharing, you just literally cannot be successful working and in particular resolving issues. And I'm also a big believer in keep it simple. Like I say, I've been in the industry a long time. I've been in quality a long time. And as I mentioned in an earlier slide, one of the things that's happening now is people are going back in and tightening up tolerances and making more critical dimensions on drawings, because you think that's the way to solve all these quality problems and to solve all the issues that we have. And I think that's dead wrong. I think that the simpler the design is, the easier it is to manufacture, and the more simple the requirements are to get the same effect, and the more chance you have of being successful at being able to make the product the same way every time, and to the level of quality that you need to have to be successful, both in inner customer quality as well as warranty and things down the field. So I'm a firm believer in trying to keep it simple. It's not that easy to do. We complicate things and the customers are also complicating things because of the new rules that are being put into place. We're having a lot of discussion on those, but I believe if you do these three things, if you're honest with each other, open with each other, and simple with each other, then you can have trust. And if you have trust, you can be successful in how you work with each other. Again, an example of that is if you, and people and when I do this in person, again, I get to ask a lot more questions, but one of the things I ask question is, what do they consider trust? Since I can't do that, I've got a slide that basically says, which of these would you feel is any value if you don't have trust? Is data any good if you don't trust it? Are contracts or agreements, formal or otherwise, any good if you don't trust it or trust each other? What good are commitments if you don't trust the person or the people that are making them? What good are results and result reports that are published or non-published or just shared if you don't trust the information that's being used to generate them? What good are promises, not just commitments, but promises, if you don't have trust? What kind of expectations can you have if you don't have trust, or if there's lack of trust? What kind of relationship will you have with anyone if you don't have trust? That was one of the things I wanted to try to drive across on this paper, is that we're in a situation we're at a crossroad for quality professionals and for our industry, where the baby boomers are moving out, the newer generations are coming in. It's hard to communicate as it is, and we've created a situation where the people going out and the people coming in are having to deal with massive problems with trust. And in order to pass the baton, you got to trust that the person running in front of you is going to be keeping up the speed and has hand in the right spot, and you got to trust that the person following up behind you is going to be there and have his hand in the right spot. And right now it's hard to even have discussions about that with the way that we currently got our industry. So what kind of relationship can you have? Is it going to be, if you have trust, it can be an effective relationship. If you don't, then the relationship may be quite the opposite, and the problems that we have and have had are going to continue to go on so much further. So what is trust? Well, here's a good example of trust, one of my favorites. And since I'm a brand new grandfather, I have a 3-year-old grandson, or not quite 3-year-old grandson. To me, a good example of trust is, it's the feeling a child has when you throw him or her up in the air and you catch him or her, and they really enjoy it. If you think about that from a definition, you can think of times when you've thrown a child up in the air and they didn't enjoy it, they were scared the whole time, and even if you caught them, even if you throw them a second time, they may not have enjoyed it. If they don't enjoy it, then they're going to have a hard time trusting you whether you catch the child or not. If they enjoy it, then that means that they trust you, they know it's fun, and they're going to look forward to you picking them up and tossing them up in the air and catching them for as long as you both are physically able to do it. So to me, a good example of trust is this particular picture, because in we all have situations where we're asked to do things or we're required to do things. We don't always like to do them, but they're much easier to do if we trust each other, and we're always a lot much more successful if we trust each other. So in closing for the presentation I made, again, the presentation in person is always a lot more fun because we get to laugh a little bit more and things like that. But what I was hoping to accomplish today was to share my personal feelings about what's going on in the industry, and that is that we don't have enough quality professionals and nobody's signing up to be in quality, and that this problem with trust is affecting both us being able to get more people interested in our industry and in our profession, but it's also creating problems for the handoff from the baby boomers to the next generation, and it's getting out of hand from the standpoint that the industries are overreacting, in my opinion, in how they're trying to manage this, and we as quality professionals are in for a very difficult time if something isn't done, and then we will have to do it to try to rectify the problem. So I'm going to open this up for questions. I think that Lori can help with that. I've got to figure out how to get to my thing. I think if you type into the chat, then we will be able to see questions anybody has. Again, I apologize, but webinars and online is very difficult to just open it and let people raise their hand and ask questions. So what I thought we'd try to do is see if there's any written questions anybody wants to submit using the chat feature. If not, you can log on to the ASQ Automotive division site, and my contact information is there. I would be more than willing to have more discussion with you or to answer any questions you have that we're not able to ask tonight. So is there anybody?
Yeah, we did get a question. I don't know if you're able to see it or not. Given all the history you explained, what might be an impetus for global OEMs to consolidate their customer-specific requirements to reduce complexity for suppliers who serve several OEMs?
That is a very good question, and this one gets asked every time. I can tell you what my thoughts are. I can also tell you what I think is happening today. I'm on a committee. As you can see in the paper, I'm going to be the new chair for the Automotive division. One of the things that we've targeted to do over the next couple of years is we're trying to take our division global, and there's two reasons for that. One is we want to grow our members, but also we want to have impact on this very kind of thing globally. But I'm also on a committee at the AIG, an ad hoc committee that's trying to tackle this very issue. One of the things that's going to have to happen is, and I think the answer to the question first is what's causing it is money. You know, it's the drive that drives things right now. Everybody, profits get hurt when trust goes away. You know, the big names that you've seen in the papers over the last few years are struggling to come back. But what we need to do, and I'm trying to get the two main bodies, the AIG and the IATF and the ASQ, those are the three main bodies in quality that can impact this. We're trying to make a concerted push with all of them to get all the OEMs, and not just the ones that you're familiar with that were involved with the TS, but even the Germans and the VDA and the Japanese through the JAMA and the AMFIA, all the different global organizations. We're trying to get them all into a meeting where we can have some discussion, because it's the cost is going to be what we will have to use to convince them. First, it's the risk and the cost. Now, there was a recent development that's going to help our cause, and again, the new ISO standard that came out has a major effect on all of the other standards, because it's the guidance document that TS 16949 uses. It's also the one that VDA uses, and several other standards. It was changed in such a way, and it changed a couple specific things, including it changed from management to leadership, and it changed the way the risk is viewed from being to being a major requirement in it. We do think that both VDA, TS 16940, and all of the automotive standards are going to have to change to be able to reflect that. And what we're trying to do is get them to change so that they're all the same. I've sat in multiple meetings recently with OEMs at the AIG, where we basically point out to them their current requirements for trying to do second-party audits for CQIs and for trying to manage all this stuff individually isn't going to work. There are lots of suppliers that are leaving the industry, including some of the largest long-term automotive companies that, you know, everybody knows. You read in the papers about companies like Johnson Controls that have said they want out of the automotive industry. So it's going to take an effort similar like we had back in '85 when we first were able to push the QS9000. I think we have one advantage in the sense that the base standards change, but I think it's going to take a concerted effort from all of the organizations that represent us, the ASQ, the AIG, the IATF, etc., to all get together and push at the same time. And that's what we're trying to do, so hopefully we will be successful in that.
I have another question. They're starting to come in. Can you share ideas on how we can drive interest and engagement of more younger generations in the automobile hardware industry?
Well, again, I can share my opinions, and as I mentioned, it's been a long time, but as I get older, I got softer, and I got volunteered to get involved in the ASQ again and AIG, and I'm happy about it, but it's a lot of work. I was at a TCC, a technical committee meeting for the ASQ in February in Milwaukee, where we had all of the member leaders there, and I brought this same topic up. There's two things that I think the ASQ can help do. One is we need to figure out a way to get the emotion out of being a quality professional. So we need to be able to get people to be interested in being quality again, and what we have to do is literally, and I hate to use this word, but we got to market it. The problem we have is that, and you see it every day, those of you that are hiring professionals, when you hire a new quality person, or if you bring somebody into quality from another thing, there's two things that happen. Either they really like it and they stay, and that's what most of the people on this call are, or they don't like it at all and they get right back out. I've got several different survey data points that point out that the reason they get back out is the emotions again. If you put something on hold in quality, you're doing your job, but that means somebody else is affected. So one of the things we got to do is we've got to do a better job of improving the image of being a quality professional. It's a great job. I've been doing it my whole career. I'm very proud of my career. I'm very proud of the people I've worked with, and I don't know why people would not want to be in quality, but other than the perception. So that's one of the things, and I'm asking the ASQ to help with that. We also have to help you, who are the quality professionals out there. We got to give you some tools other than SPC and things like that to help you be able to go in and properly manage that same type of perception in your business, because I would bet that not everybody on this call, but there are people on this call that have a problem. Every time you do your job, somebody gets irritated or it affects somebody else and it becomes a challenge. That's one of the things we have to do. I do not have the answers how to do it. I did submit some suggestions to this committee, and I think the ASQ is going to put together a committee to try to tackle it. I don't know if that answers your question because there's no real easy answer, but I think we're going to have to find out what is causing the problem more directly than just my opinion, and then put together a very concerted effort to correct it. If we do that, then we can spread the word globally. We can get the customers to work with us better. I think that we have to get the trust back in the profession as well as in each other.
I have another question. Two more up so far. Says, I agree that there is a trust issue. How do we improve honesty, openness, and simplicity? Sometimes even within OEMs, the silos, quality, design, engineering, manufacturing, purchasing, do not trust one another. And I agree with that. I see that every day.
Well, I think whoever wrote this question is dead on. And it's not just sometimes, it's a majority of the time. I'll go back to what I pointed out earlier. I think the first thing that I'm hoping will help is, again, if you aren't familiar with it, you should, as quickly as you can, go on and try to learn as much as you can about the new ISO 9001 standard. A lot of people have read it and look at it and think, well, it's not that big change, but it really is. It's a huge change, and what we need to do, we being quality professionals in industries that have had these type of problems. We need to try to take advantage of that. The ISO standard has shifted from management to focusing on leadership. And if you're not familiar with what that is, there's a difference between a manager and a leader. And so when we start talking about the new TS standard and we start talking about the audit and any of the training and any of the things that we as quality professionals do in our toolbox, this is our best chance we've had in a long time to convert our managers, including CEOs and people that we work for that are just managers, and to try to make them quality leaders or leaders that have a quality attitude. And that's what that standard gives us the opportunity to do. So I'm hoping, and that's why I'm involved with both the AIG and the ASQ, I'm hoping that we can influence the IATF and some of the other bodies so that when they put together the new automotive industry standards, they take that into account. Because if they do that, they can push the OEMs to be more consistent. If the standards are more specific, and then the OEMs don't have to write their own. So one way is to try to utilize the standard itself. The other thing, as I mentioned before, is I do think that the automotive profession, and again, to me, I've met with the new head of the ASQ and with the team there. I think that the automotive profession has done a great job, and the ASQ has done a great job in marketing our tools and our body of knowledge and networking, and we're a phenomenal organization. I think, though, we've missed the boat completely when it comes to publicizing how valuable our profession is. We know that it is because we've got all these tools that when you measure them show how valuable we are. The cost of quality is better, the problems go away, the customer satisfaction levels go up. So we've got lots of metrics that show from a data standpoint how effective and a good quality people are. But what we haven't done is done a very effective job of the profession itself, and I think we need to fix that as well.
I have another question, a couple more. How do we build trust once it is lost? I have this relationship with my supplier. Just being open, honest, is not sufficient.
Well, that is probably the most difficult question, and I can answer that from a couple standpoints. One is, as I mentioned earlier, the business relationship are a lot like personal relationships. If you lose trust in your partner, your significant other, or you're a family member or a close friend, it is very difficult to get back, even if you have strong feelings for them. The books you read about this, and if you talk to all the experts on how to rebuild trust, they tell you it starts by first sitting down and, again, being honest and being open. So what caused the problem with trust? And again, if you look at it from the standpoint, you did the bad thing, so it's your problem, rather than looking at, okay, so what were the contributors to how we got into this in the first place? If you sit down and you're open and honest, even with a supplier or with a competitor, then at least you can start to look at what caused the problems and then maybe come up with some ideas on how to correct the problem and prevent it from happening again. If you take I'll call it the DMAC approach. I can give you a quick example. I had a supplier that, and I'm not going to give you the names in it, but I had a supplier that falsified some information on a PPAP package. Now, in my old days, and probably more than in Tuesday, that would have been cause to throw that supplier out immediately, wouldn't have been in discussion, and in some cases, you might even take another action on them. But this particular product had been launching forever. It had been back and forth designed. It was just a mess from day one. So there's lots of things that went in the back. So rather than do that, I called our team and the suppliers team, top management, and the people that were involved into a meeting off-site, not at my plant, not at their plant, but in a conference room off-site. And we sat down and we started picking and said, okay, what led up to this? And we started listing down just like you would in 8D. Here are the things that I did wrong, here are things you did wrong, you changed the drawing here, I cut this out, I changed it. And we started looking at everything that led to it, and we said, okay, it was a terrible thing to do, it was a bad thing to do, here are the things that led up to it. Now, I can fix my part of it, you can fix your part of it, but the the trust part of it is going to have to be fixed over time. So we put down some ground rules. We did not get rid of the supplier. We gave them some very challenging things to do to correct the problem, and then we gave them a certain amount of time to correct it. And they were able to do that. And then over the next couple years, because this was a few years ago, we continued to do that. And after about 4 or 5 years, I suppose we've probably gotten back to about as close as we can to ever having a trusting relationship. You will never, in my opinion, have a 100% trusting relationship, even with a significant other. But you can get to the point to where it's strong enough to where you can run a business, but maybe you'll have to have some different rules or some different steps in your process or some different arrangements in how you work with each other to compensate for it. But you got to sit down, you got to be open and honest to talk to each other. And if you can't do that at all, then get out and go somewhere else, because if you can't do that, there's a zero chance. Even if you do that, it's going to require an enormous amount of work.
I have another question. So how do you see industries simplifying requirements as a means to be more efficient and more trusted? Would you do it vertical integration, long-term partnerships and supply lines? What would you do?
Well, both of those techniques work. I'm a big fan of long-term relationships with the supplier, because if it's a good relationship, it's got to be based on trust. You can't have a long-term relationship with a customer or a supplier if there isn't a certain amount of level in trust, and that's earned. As I mentioned earlier, it's earned. I think that either way would work, though. It comes down to the fundamentals again, is whether you're doing it through a long-term relationship, you're doing it through some type of integration or vertical working structure, you're going to have to be, again, you're going to have to make sure that whoever you're trying to build this trusting relationship with, you're open with them. You have to be you have to be able to trust each other. So it really comes down to setting up real good communications and demonstrating that you're a good long-term partner by contributing and sharing and not hiding and keeping secrets and things. It's not easy. This is not going to be easy, especially with the climate we have today and with the way our current world is running right now. None of this is going to be easy. It's going to require a tremendous amount of effort, and many of the companies and many of the things are just not going to make it. But if you really want to make it work, it comes down again to those same three principles to me. Keeping it simple is just a case of sitting down and discussing how do we make it simple. If you know what the risks are, it's easy to figure out what you might need to manage for the risk instead of guessing and putting 20 criticals on the drawing instead of the 4 you really need. You don't have to have all that wording in the contract. If you trust each other, you can keep the contract simple. So again, it comes down to, as long as you have an open and honest relationship, then the rules you play by can be simple. At least that's my opinion.
I don't see, well, maybe I get more. Yep, got another question. Any ideas to get operations groups to embrace TS 16949, DIQS, problem solving, etc., versus pushing those initiatives to their quality department?
Well, I'm hopeful, and that's been a question that I've been hearing for 40 years too, is how do you get other people? Anytime you use the word quality, people interpret that to mean it's the quality manager, the quality engineer, the quality leader's job. So when you put the word quality out there, that's what everybody interprets it to mean. I think with the changes, at least the way that I've interpreted them and the people that I interviewed, and if you read our paper, I think that the new standard is going to give us a good chance to be able to correct that, because shifting from managers to leaders literally means that the person that's the head of that particular plant or the head of that organization or that is leading that function or that group is going to have to be able to demonstrate that how they're doing it and that they're effective at it. So one of the things we're expecting to come out of this when the new TS standards come out, and probably the new VDA, is that when you go to do an audit, the audit's not going to be with the quality guys or the people sitting in the office or the middle managers. It's going to start right with the CEO if it's at the headquarters, or right with the plant manager, because that's where leadership starts. So we think that the intention behind the new ISO standard is to try to help with that very problem, is to try to make sure that the business is being led throughout the ranks rather than managed throughout the ranks. So hopefully the standard itself is going to give us some assistance in doing that. But that goes back to this. It also goes back to what I was talking about trying to improve the quality reputation and trying to market quality better. We need to make sure that everybody understands there is a specific role quality professionals have, but that everything we do is dependent and in line with what other people do. We can help prevent product from getting out the door, but the people making it still have to make it right. That's where it should be done. So we need to go back and revisit our toolbox and focus a little bit more on how to show what the real role of quality is, but how everybody else has a role in quality. And I don't mean to sound wishy-washy, but this is something that we're looking at trying to address in a much more formal fashion. So I don't know if that's the answer you were looking for. Like I say, I think the best thing that's going to come out is I think that the standards should give us some help in trying to force all the different people in the organization to recognize their role when it comes to quality and other areas that management has set as objectives. So hopefully the standards will help a little bit with that, but we still have to do some work, and I think the ASQ's got to lead this, in trying to make sure that what is quality is better understood, who are quality is better understood, and the values and the splits is better understood.
Awesome. Anybody else have any more questions? I have one comment of, thank you for sharing. Being in quality from the mid-'80s in automotive, I can relate to your presentation. Well done, and thank you.
Well, if we're done with the questions, if we're done with the questions, the last thing I would like to say to everybody on the call again is that, again, the purpose of this, nobody on this call now is going to go out and know how to do a good orthogonal experiment, or going to know how to be able to go out and do any kind of Weibull analysis or any of the other things that I've talked about in the past. The intention here wasn't to try to teach you guys or you gals or anybody that's called any new tools from the standpoint of becoming better at being a quality engineer. I was hoping, I've been harping this same tune to everybody that I can for many years now. I finally somebody made the mistake of allowing me the opportunity to put a paper together and to present it, so I'm hoping to get other people in the automotive industry that can see this, recognize it's coming, so that we can start working together to fix it. Because again, when the baby boomers are gone, and again, that line on the end of that chart, that was me. That's how much longer I'm going to be on Earth, even if I don't retire before then. If we don't do something to correct it, then those that are left going forward are going to have an even bigger problem. But these issues that we see every day with, and I don't mean to use names, so if anybody in this calls from the companies, the Takata issues, the Volkswagen issues, the GM issues, those issues are just going to get more and more and more magnified. And then next thing you know, we're all going to be spending most of our time in learning how to talk in front of cameras and learning how to do this rather than how to go out and solve a quality problem. So I'm hoping that this paper, I was able to share something that I've been wanting to vet for a long time. Anybody has any questions, wants to get involved, or has any ideas, you can, as you can see on this page there, the ASQ Automotive Division, you can go to that website and put that on our, I will post, when we post the paper, I will post my an email address where you can contact me directly as well. And you're also cordially invited to attend any ASQ Automotive Division meetings. The World Conference, we're always there. Or if you're not in the Automotive Division, you're whatever portion of the ASQ you're with. If what I said today makes any sense to you, then you can start having some of the discussion with your peers and with the people you work with, and maybe we can get the organization rallied around trying to do something about it before it's too late. That was the whole purpose for today's meeting. I apologize for not being as funny as it usually is. It's much more fun when you present in person, but I'm hoping that it still got the points across and that everybody enjoyed it. And then grateful, especially for this time of year, for all of you that sit in with me late at night during the holidays to let me vent a little bit. So thank you very much. Hope everybody has a great holiday.
Well, David, thank you very much, and thank everybody for attending the webinar. You can send any questions my way, and there will be an email being sent that you had attended. Probably not until tomorrow. Thank you very much. I'll figure out how to end it.
So, Lori, you are the one who ends it?
I have to. Sorry, everybody.